book. There's a chapter on the New Hampshire video that we did, and that was the first video in a series of videos on voter fraud. You mentioned a champion of the First Amendment, and I'm very strongly a champion of the First Amendment, and it seems like we're having a constitutional crisis in this country right now about what it means to be a journalist. Congress is talking about defining who is a journalist and who is not a journalist. And this book is really about, this book Breakthrough is about my journey on the front lines of being a journalist in the year 2013, what it means to be a journalist these days. Journalism is something that you do, though the powers that be want to make journalism something that you are. And when they make it something that you are, they can restrict who is a journalist and then restrict who has First Amendment rights. But it all started, as it was alluded to, back at Rutgers University. This is where the book starts out, where I'm sitting in a seminar, and I'm with my dean. And one of my deans leans in and he says, "Now, James, I've read the National Review. A respectable journalist like Buckley just talks about opinions and educates people. It doesn't shake things up and get in people's faces and cause all this trouble." And it was at that moment that I learned what soft tyranny was all about. It was about people, the establishment, the governing structure, even on campus, trying to restrict journalists' rights to challenge them. And it was a microcosm of what I would experience on the federal level. So we started doing campaigns at Rutgers University. We started trying to put American flags in classrooms, and then the reaction of the people that we were talking to would make the story. The deans there, elsewhere, would say, "Oh, if we let you put an American flag on campus, we'd have to let you put a Ugandan flag on campus. And it's propaganda, you don't want to put the flag up." And it was the reaction that made the story. We did a whole bunch of stories on campus when I got started where we would tape professors. We would confront the professors. We would expose how much money the professors made, because it's public information in New Jersey to do so. And the professors would respond profanely and cursing, and then we'd give them awards for cursing like a drunken sailor. In one such video, we actually did try to ban Lucky Charms on the grounds it's racist against Irish people. And we put them in a lose-lose situation, because either they abide by their own campus speech code, which says you can't offend people, or they don't take our complaints of racial offensive seriously. They took the lesser of those two options and told us they would remove Lucky Charms because it's racist. So I suppose you could bring the whole university to a standstill. I mean, there's Fruit Loops. You know, some students may be gay, but they're not necessarily loopy. And you could do a series of things, and we started taking it to the next level. We started doing videos on Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood was founded by Margaret Sanger, who was a racial eugenicist. So we said we wanted to donate money to Planned Parenthood because we absolutely agree with everything Margaret Sanger said. And there's two men, and we were using the language of Margaret Sanger. We said, "I want to make a donation to Planned Parenthood because there's too many African Americans in this country." And they told us they would accept our money for racist motives. And then people started getting fired. The vice president of Planned Parenthood got fired. There were protests. African Americans were outraged by what they saw on these tapes and protested outside Planned Parenthood. Lila Rose, young woman I met, went on to do these sting operations. I would pose as her boyfriend, and they would tell us to overlook statutory rape. And people were getting fired. Congress was starting to get involved. And then I got a message from a young woman after she saw the Planned Parenthood video. She says, "James, what would you think about going into Acorn and posing as a prostitute?" And you know, most people get that type of message, they delete it immediately. And I said, "That is brilliant." And but the problem was, of course, finding a prostitute, or a woman to play the role of prostitute. And Hannah offered her services immediately. And you know, being from Miami, Hannah showed up in this, you know, leather strapless thing and sarong and stilettos. But I said, "Well, there needs to be a pimp." And I didn't know where to find a pimp. There was a guy I knew in New Jersey who kind of was, He kind of looked more like a pimp, but he couldn't do it. So I borrowed my grandmother's chinchilla shawl wardrobe and got my grandfather's derby hat and dressed up in a suit and put the fur on my suit, and we went around and we played the role of the pimp and the prostitute. And we never expected it would turn into what it turned into, but we went into these offices and we said we wanted to traffic in girls to be underage hookers. And they were totally receptive to this. Apparently they are used to giving this type of advice. I improvised. I said, well, we have 13 of them. They said, that's fine. You can declare them as dependents on your tax forms. And then I said, okay, well, they're from El Salvador. They're legal immigrants. And they said, make sure you don't tell the police. So within 1 week of releasing these videos, Congress voted to defund ACORN. Both houses of Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, did so. And President Obama was politically powerless to do anything about it. It was at this point I discovered what the war really was all about. And it certainly was not really fundamentally about ACORN or Planned Parenthood. It was about the media. It was about the media, which literally used every possible device and tactic to shut me down. They have literally defamed me. I have settled defamation lawsuits with the media. And that's when things really began, after the ACORN story. From then, we did stories on labor unions, teachers unions, Medicaid fraud. Actually, locally in Maine, we did a story on Medicaid. We'd go in posing as terrorists, as drug dealers, as mobsters, and they would tell us to classify our business as babysitting on the application. LePage responded to the videos. We got Cuccinelli to respond to our videos. Every governor in every state, we did it. So there began a trend. And the trend was, stop responding to the government and stop reacting to the media and start getting the government and the media to respond to you. And that's what journalism is all about. We did videos on one of my favorite videos. I'm not here to show it, but it is my favorite. We did a video where I was actually with Andrew Breitbart here in New Hampshire at one of the events 2 years ago. And we're talking, and everyone says, James, why don't you investigate the labor unions or something involving makeshift work? So Andrew and I looked at each other, we said, why don't we start a fictitious company and call it Earth Supply and Renewal? Earth Supply and Renewal. And the mission of Earth Supply and Renewal would be to dig holes and fill them back in again. And we met with these people, this union boss, this assemblyman, this legislator, and they told us how to get taxpayer funding to dig ditches and fill them back in again. They actually said that's basically what they do in New York. So we intend to shock people, and oftentimes they kind of ingratiate themselves to us. We did videos this year, another one of my favorites, where this whole gun debate has been raging nationally. And there's this whole discussion about gun-free zones. You know, gun-free zones are good for the kids. There was a discussion, I remember the story in New York where they printed the names of the law-abiding gun owners in Westchester? So we went to the homes of the people who printed those names, and we asked them to put a sign in their lawns saying their homes were proudly gun-free. Of course, nobody with any self-respect would ever put a sign on their lawn saying their home is gun-free. So we're exposing the hypocrisy. And I think in our country, I think that elections are important, and that's one way to fight, but we don't fight along those lines. We go outside the system. We are outsiders. And I think that there are extraordinary mechanisms in Washington, D.C. to prevent people from reclaiming their power as constituents. People say, James, why didn't you call the book Our Guerrilla War to Expose Fraud and Save the Republic? Because we're not a democracy. And that's true, we're not a direct democracy. We are a democratic republic, small d, small r. And we are a democratic republic. And it's the democratic nature of our republic which is in jeopardy. People feel like they're not being represented fairly. And I think that this type of journalism, this sort of muckraking investigative reporting, is the best way to reclaim our power as citizens, to use sunlight, and to let the sunlight be the best disinfectant.